So with the completion of the first series, based on kimono number 1, I decided to go on to another one, this time selecting a kimono that had a very different character than the first. This second kimono is actually made for a young girl in celebration of an annual holiday which is called Girls' Day in Japan. And on that day, parents dress their young daughters in most fantastic traditional kimono outfits with the traditional hairstyles, and the girls get their friends together in their home where they have tea parties, they have little cakes and little sugared flowers and so on that they share with one another. In the living room of the home, there's a depiction of the imperial family rendered in dolls, which is a very traditional thing. What I was thinking about as I looked at this textile, which was obviously to make the daughter look like she was this beautiful, budding creature of nature, is that in a lot of ways her parents were objectifying her. That is, making something out of their daughter which I felt was kind of similar to what had happened in the area in which I'm living in the great moment of all that financial prosperity that we knew in the early part of the 21st century. When people designed homes, built new homes that were based around gold-plated knobs in the bathroom and worked from there out. It was all prestige. The prestige factor was important. So I had mentioned on Kimono 1, I thought about the idea of laughter as an antidote to the financial situation. And in this case, I needed to explore, to see what I could do with this idea of objectification in conjunction with this beautiful fabric. Incidentally, this is the lining of the kimono as well, so you can see it was a very glamorous outfit. So the first thing I did was to cut the kimono in pieces and do a series of letter forms. I don't know if this is clear or not, but if you look carefully, you'll see that I've embroidered on the surface of those discs which I had used on the previous project, and keeping in line with the use of language as seen in the previous work as well, I was looking for 2 words that would perfectly characterize what I felt was embodied in this. One of those words had to be possessions. Possessions, that was really important. So a beautiful textile in relationship to the word possession. What is the other word that's needed? I hunted around and finally I came up with the idea of using the word proliferous. Proliferous possessions sounded perfect to me. So what I did was to make each one of those letters, render each one of those letters onto the original kimono fabric, and then I separated the letters, as you can see here, kind of trying to make an object out of these. So I'm taking language and kind of converting it into the condition of the object possessed, and all retaining its kind of beauty and so on, but all interchangeable, as we do with objects. They never end up being used as they were intended. So I did this piece, and then I moved on after this to doing a second one, which you can see up above here. And this is a longer piece, which is the original kimono width, and I took the same words, proliferous and possessions, and applied them to the surface of the kimono after I had kind of trapped some of the elements in the pattern with black, those black sequins encircling these areas, kind of like grabbing onto them. I wanted to have some feeling that I was kind of reaching into the textile and really grabbing something. Then it occurred to me how much this is like those fabulous illuminated manuscripts from the Middle Ages, where in a Bible, for example, the first page is a beautiful elaboration on the first letter of the first word. And embedded into the text are all these images which help to elaborate on the subject of the word. And so that was ultimately the goal. After this piece was completed, I had another idea. And that was that I felt it needed to be extended in some way. So in order to extend it, what I decided to do was to make an image which took the original kimono fabric and attempted to objectify it. I hope you can see this here, that this now tends to take the form of something. I can't tell you what it is. It is a thing. And in relationship to the thingness that you observe here, I worked with a series of lines that actually were considered to be extensions of what I had up above, but I wanted something like tentacles, something that reached out as though it was reaching and grabbing or reaching down, kind of like octopus tentacles or fishing lines, perhaps, reaching for in relationship to this idea of possessing. Now, my idea was that the gray area would be the area over which this panel would pass. And I made 8 of these elements. And now I put it together and something didn't click. I'm going to stop there because I want to take you in the next room and show you what came about as a result of all of this. So sometimes plans don't actually work to the degree that one would hope they would. Here you can see the case where this was the area where that other panel was to float across. Actually, I put it all together and I thought, Gerhardt, this looks exactly like what you had intended it to look like. It needs some kind of juice. Something needs to happen to establish some kind of tension in the piece. At that point, as oftentimes happens, I sat at my drawing table, and it just happened that on the table I had been to an antique show and found this box of old Victorian stencils. And there are a variety of subjects. They would have been used by a child back in the late 19th century, early part of the 20th century, with a variety of subjects. So why not? I decided to pull out a sheet of black paper and transferred with white pencil the image of the stencil onto the paper, and became kind of interested in some of the subjects. One of the subjects was 2 girls that are positioned adjacent to a chair. And here in this piece, you can see, I think, a little more clearly, the 2 girls, the chair. This girl is wearing a blindfold, and they're engaged in this game of blind man's bluff or hide and seek. What interested me was that the girls are probably friends. They're probably having a really good time together. They're probably thinking of this as fun, but the chair, in fact, could be the reason this girl falls down and breaks her arm. I thought, that's very much like this economy that I was talking about. Trusting things that are supposed to be okay and finding out that something goes awry in the process. So I decided to do a drawing that incorporates the stencil, placing these subjects within a field that had an architectural sense about it. And then one day, very bravely, I simply put these panels together with the panels that I had made for the other purpose, and I thought, oh my gosh, I would never have thought about those things together. But in fact, it was right on. And I always think of this like putting lemon juice on fish. The fish doesn't need the know that it needs the lemon juice, nor does the lemon expect that a fish is going to be part of its life. But when these 2 conditions came together, the sense of reaching and holding and the sense of the tension between these parts, they seem to open up an interesting potential that I really enjoyed. So what one sees here is various subjects that are in that kind of condition, each of which talks about relationships that I am ultimately very interested in. One I'll just mention here, the horse, the girl, her doll, and the baby buggy. I went to school in Los Angeles, elementary school, and then on to junior high school, my first art class. All the boys were drawing cars and landscapes, and what were the girls drawing? Horses. We didn't have any horses in the area in which we lived, and I kept thinking to myself, where does that come from? But when I saw the horse stencil and the girl holding the doll, and kind of brought this together in a configuration that almost suggests a game board. I hope you see that. That began to establish this tension here, which is similar to the tension that I talked about between the two girls on the chair in the first example. Now, I want to show you what came from all of this. So once I had seen these pieces, they just spoke to me about wanting to be larger and wanting to be rendered in fabric. And so I decided to make a series of quilts, which I hadn't done before either. And so here you can see basically this is an enlargement. I held on to the stencil-like character in the way in which this has been printed on the textile. And these were months in the making, all hand-sewn quilts. I tried to do it in the very traditional way. And in fact, if you touch the fabric, you can see this is something you'd be happy to sleep under one night. That sense of getting close to the meaning and the purpose of the object seemed really important. So imagine this. This was being developed. As you can see here, this was not there. And at one moment, I kept looking at it and thinking, what does this need? At one moment, I looked over at my original kimono fabric and I said, Zingo, that's absolutely what needs to be there. So now, in the place of the tension between these two figures and the ultimate danger, exists that original textile that I was talking about. Then in addition to that, I was excited about the environment of the quilt piece, and I decided to enlarge the whole scheme of this, creating a macro and micro relationship to the patterning. So the large elements are rendered photographically. They're actually a photographic enlargement of the original textile. And they're placed into an environment wherein I even keep the sense of the embroidery of these discs on the surface. I had all of these cut from acrylic, and they are actually sewn to the ground. The goal that I had in mind was to juxtapose two languages in the piece. The micro talks more about the romantic, the historic and romantic Victorian sensibility from which the quilt and the stencil and the subjects come. The macro talks more about advertising as one would find it at a local discount store or the old drugstore, an in-your-face kind of relationship. And in that sense, the two, to me, maintain some of that tension that I was really interested in, the lemon and fish kind of story.